forget who really knows what's the truth. Often dignified, how funny changing the tide. It feels like you already knew. That's the downfall, you would never run in circles. Feels like you already knew. That's the downfall, you would never.
What's up, everybody? How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? All right, just before we even get started, because we got a lot to get through in this hour and a half, let me fire off the recording here, and we shall proceed with the Liberty Talk.
The Constitution isn't just a document. It's a blueprint for freedom. We're breaking down politics at every level, exposing government overreach, and going where the mainstream media surely won't. Join us in defending individual rights against the bureaucratic tide. You're listening to the Missouri Liberty Report.
All right, everybody. Good to hear you, see you back. Hope you're enjoying the previous podcast that we put out, and we hope for your continued support and viewership. And good evening to you, Missouri Constitution Ninja. Good to see you in the live chat. So, folks, just a quick announcement, or maybe just a few minutes. I don't want to dwell on this, but we were supposed to have a guest on the show. He goes by the name Cecil Ince. Some things were found, and we didn't feel comfortable having him on after that. I will pull up so everyone here can see the page. Now, okay, folks, this article is from 2020. I get it. 6 years ago, still made Brandon and myself uncomfortable. Just put it that way. Let me pull up the screen here. Missouri special ed panelist wonders if kids can consent to sex. And I'm not going to go, the beginning of the article says the age of consent is an awkward hill. Many libertarians choose it as their hill to die on, and most who choose that hill do indeed die there. Yet a very curious individual has chosen that hill, which should disturb parents with high school-age children throughout the state of Missouri. Cecil Ince is not only a member and vice chair of the Missouri Libertarian Party, but also on the Missouri Special Education Advisory Panel. Ince argued on Facebook in favor of school-age children having sex with teachers and adults. Now, that might be going a little far, is what they're saying. But you get the point. Again, I'm not going to go way in depth. He's been removed from certain things, and again, didn't feel comfortable having him on the show. Didn't want that. I'm speaking for myself, and I think I'm speaking for Brandon here. We did not want that kind of stuff attached to this show. I do not want people coming back here going, why would you have somebody on your show like that? Now, we're free to choose whoever our guests are. I don't want the community at large or our listeners saying, well, you shouldn't have this person on. You should have this person on. We don't run our show that way. But if we want to be taken seriously, and you want to come on here and say, and this is just looming in the air, like, hey, 13-year-old kids, if they consent to having sex with an adult, what's the big deal? Not a discussion that I want to have on the show, not anything that I want to discuss. There's so many awful roads to go down on that topic. Now, I will say this, and then I'll put it to bed on my end, and I'll let Brandon speak. I understand kind of where they're coming from. I don't agree with it, but I understand the argument. Sometimes when you get in these discussions about the state's authority, this, that, and the other, and consent and all these things, sometimes you can make a somewhat maybe feeble argument to try to show your point. It's not that you necessarily agree with it. Sometimes people want to try to draw a line of what age, when someone's fully developed and can make decisions on their own. So you have these arguments and you have these debates. about age of consent, and it doesn't matter if it's sex or sending someone to war or drinking alcohol or smoking cigarettes. There's debates across all types of topics when it comes to the age of consent. But when it comes to teachers and kids having sex and stuff, man, like I'm out. I'm just not bringing all that dirty laundry on or having it drug on after me after a show. I don't feel like I don't want to spend my time defending Brandon and myself for having a guest on. And it's a good thing. Did Brandon, are you the one that found this?
Somebody sent it to me, but I sent it to you. Yeah, that's
So Brandon sent it to me, and I pumped the brakes. I got to work and I was like, nope, we're not doing this now. Out. And Brandon's like, yeah, absolutely agree. Because I asked Brandon, what do you think? How can we bring this up? Can we have him on, have a discussion? But with that rolling around in our heads the whole time, like it would be so awkward. And part of my probing mind would want to say, dude, why would you put this out here? Like I would want to know, which probably doesn't lead to a good place, distracts from a whole lot of other things. It turns into a just disgusting show. So I decided, yeah, we're going to nix it. We're going to move on. We got plenty of other news to talk about. But I've said my piece, Brandon. Your thoughts?
Oh, I mean, you pretty much nailed it. Like you said, I'm not trying to sit here and have a nitpick, nuanced discussion on on a topic like that. And I like being too philosophical, especially in the Libertarian Party and like the non-aggression principle and blah 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 blah. It can lead you to some pretty not realistic, not living in the real world conclusions. And like you said, we're trying to have serious guests on. We're trying to have like real conversations about liberty. And if he came on, it would for sure take up a significant part of the show, just because how would it not when you know what I mean? And it's putting us in a position to have him on and then defend having him. And no, it's not worth the trouble when there are real things of liberty to talk about, not some no name candidate who's probably not going to draw much anyway.
Yeah. So we just want to be upfront with you all. We appreciate the listeners and we appreciate our viewers, but we also, there are things sometimes there's uncomfortable topics that you don't have a choice. You have to talk about, right? The stuff with the Epstein files and some of the disgusting things, we have to talk about that because there are people in very high places doing awful things. And as much as it turns your stomach and makes you want to, as George Carlin said, have a involuntary personal protein spill, you still have to do it. Stuff like that from a candidate that just is posing creepy questions, I'm out. I don't want to do that. And I think that Brandon and I have done a good job of bringing, discussing and debating topics, even though we don't really debate, right? We pretty much agreement on everything, but we can bring other people on and we can have discussions and we may have some minor disagreements, and that's cool. That's great. But what I don't want again is circling back to a previous episode and trying to almost like run CYA. I don't want to do that. If we're on here having a discussion about something, I shouldn't have to feel like I have to go back and cover up or try to patch over something because, these all of a sudden this information arises and it comes out of left field and you're like, whoa, pump the brakes. I'm just thankful for whoever sent that to Brandon. He saved us a lot of heartache. So to whoever that was, thank you so much, ma'am or sir. Okay. So I think I'll get rid of that tab in my web browser. I want to play. So if you folks remember here, I think Tom March was on at the time. We brought up an article about Bill Eigel and seemingly like campaign contribution kind of controversy. And we were all like, we're not a fan of this, right? So Jason Rosenbaum works for St. Louis Public Radio, and he had Bill Eigel on his show. And this was the topic du jour. That this is what they really covered was this, because there's a bill in the House from a St. Louis representative that aims to nix this out. If I listened to it on the way home, I didn't have time to send it to Brandon pre-show. It was a little like a chicken with my head cut off afterward. Got out of work late, had to stop, pick up a Walmart order, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, you're going to hear things in here. And Bill Eigel is going to try to make a point. And I just ever so slightly see where he's coming from to a very minute amount. But I have a rebuttal to that and to any other Republican that does this or tries to create laws on campaigning and, they only want big lobbyist money. I have a retort to them when they're going to complain about where money comes from. I have a retort to that, but let me pull this up. I should be marked right where the video will start right at the audio will start right at the point where he starts the interview. And this is going to be 15, 20 minutes. So let's just listen in to former Senator Bill Eigel, who is running for St. Charles County Executive or something to that effect. And he's,
that's right.
Okay. Let me play this audio, and then you all can make up your minds after what you hear from former Senator Bill Eigel.
I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Former State Senator Bill Eigel surprised a lot of Missouri political observers in 2024 when he placed second in the hotly contested GOP primary for governor. The St. Charles County Republican's performance was notable since he made a lot of enemies within the Missouri GOP during his 8 years in the Senate. But even though Eigel has turned his attention to becoming the next St. Charles County executive, his former colleagues in the Missouri General Assembly are still focusing on 2024. The Missouri House passed legislation seeking to curtail recurring donations to state-based campaigns, a fundraising method that Eigel and his allies used in his unsuccessful gubernatorial bid. The bill's sponsor, Representative Jim Murphy of St. Louis County, contended that the solicitations, which often didn't mention Eigel and focused on national issues, deceived vulnerable people.
The member who is not going to be named went across state lines, went all over with solicitations for campaign contributions. Never mentioned his name or what was going to be done with that money.
Joining us now is the member who is going to be named, former State Senator Bill Eigel. He served in the Missouri Senate from 2017 to 2025. Bill, welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Thanks for having me.
Before we have you respond to the legislation that you are purportedly the target of, let's break down what exactly we're talking about here. The Missouri Independent reported that a PAC formed to boost your campaign, known as Belief in Life and Liberty PAC, or Bill PAC, very creative, by the way, sent out emails talking about Donald Trump or national issues, and then convinced people to donate in small increments to the PAC supporting your campaign. Is that a correct explanation of what's going on here?
Well, these low dollar networks have been really used by political candidates all over the political spectrum, going really back to 2008 with the Barack Obama campaign. He was kind of the pioneer in these low dollar networks. And he came to the realization, and we saw in that election cycle, that a lot of people making small donations can be just as powerful as big donors or big special interests writing enormous checks. And those enormous checks is something that we really have right now in the state of Missouri. We saw it in my gubernatorial race. Of course, our current governor, Mike Huckabee, was famous for getting just enormous checks, $500,000, $1 million checks to fund his campaign from singular donors. And the problem I see with a lot of these big checks, of course, is that when a single person writes a massive check, a lot of time there's expectations as a result of that check. So to balance that, there's been a rise of these low dollar networks where not only are you talking about yourself as a candidate, but more than that, you're talking about ideas that you support. So a lot of the things that we put out there, whether it's through Bill PAC or Eigel for Missouri, have to do with ideas that I'm supportive of, and folks are responding and resonating to that.
Can you maybe provide an example of what these emails said and what was the thing that was prompting someone to give you your campaign or your PAC money?
Sure. In fact, I'll give you the example of what we're seeing right now in those networks, and that is messaging concerning the Department of Government Efficiency and the idea that government ought to be more efficient. We ought to have people in office at all levels of government that are supporting government efficiency. And we send that message out not just here in Missouri, but all over the country, because as it turns out, the ideas that we're talking about just like that are popular all across America right now, and folks are responding to that by sending $1, $2, $5 to candidates that are putting these ideas out there. And you know me pretty well. You know how much I fought for government efficiency, and I love the idea that these low dollar networks have allowed millions of people to engage in the political discussion in a way that they've never been able to before.
I do have to check you on one point. It is very true that, especially for the Bill PAC, there were thousands of small dollar donors, especially to your gubernatorial campaign. But isn't it also accurate that your gubernatorial campaign received a huge amount of money from plaintiffs' attorneys, and they were not small dollar donations?
No, we had everything going on in the gubernatorial campaign. But I want to say, I think we raised about $6.5 million total for the gubernatorial campaign.
So that includes your PAC and your campaign committee.
Correct. And I think of that total, almost a third of that came from low dollar donations, which was way more than we've ever seen in a state level, statewide race before. And I think the implications of that reality are what's causing people in Jefferson City a lot of fear right now. And it's causing a few of my former colleagues to try to target me with this bill. In other words, I think there's a huge amount of fear that anybody that can harness the power of low dollar networks that relies on the power of their ideas to solicit donations is a huge threat to the political status quo that has typically been built by individuals asking for big checks and then running the risk of having expectations later.
Okay, but again, going back to the trial attorney aspect, if you had become governor and you took all this money from trial attorneys, wouldn't the expectation be that you would have vetoed things that were favorable to the defense bar? I don't want to get into too much of a rabbit hole, but I do want to make sure that we're not like living in a fantasy reality here.
Not at all. The way I have always dealt with exactly what you just described is the fact that when I looked for allies, big and small, I'm looking for allies and folks that would like to support me that share my ideological position. So in the case of the attorneys groups that you talk about, a lot of the things that they oppose, I also oppose. So I'll give you, and you know what those examples are. I'll give you a couple quick ones. The Bear folks that are out there trying to prevent liability for the possibility that some of their products might hurt consumers. They don't have to, there's not an expectation there because that's how I already feel. Unfortunately, and I think this is a relatively common thing, we see too many folks in office kind of chase those big checks and are willing to change their internal compass in order to secure those checks.
Okay, so let's talk about your former colleagues and specifically about the legislation that has passed the Missouri House. Representative Jim Murphy of St. Louis County's bill would ban recurring campaign contributions without explicit permission and require those donations to stop at the end of a campaign. And he specifically cited coverage from the Missouri Independent detailing the fundraising practices of your campaign.
There was a gentleman in Nebraska, a retired veteran, who by the time he realized what had happened had given over $2,200 to this campaign. Not only did he give $2,200 to that campaign, but the governor's race was over. And the donations continued to a county executive race in the state of Missouri, and this guy's in Nebraska. And this happened over and over and over again. There was a story in the newspaper about this, and I said, you know, this is really something that we just can't have in the state of Missouri. We can't be flim-flamming people into donating to our campaigns. We have to be above board. We're better than this.
That was Representative Jim Murphy of St. Louis County talking about his bill to crack down on recurring donations. Okay, former Senator Eigel, he was clearly talking about you. Mm-hmm. What do you think of this legislation before we talk about the specific examples he was citing?
So I'm a little bit surprised that anybody with a Republican label is talking about essentially limiting the free speech of a bunch of donors that are trying to engage in the political process. And I mean, that's what's happening here. He cited one donor to the campaign. The reality is we've had hundreds of thousands of individuals respond to the messages about ideas that I'm putting out there. So the implication that the representative is making that these donors don't know what they're doing, they don't know what they're getting into, after having not talked to a single one of them. And by the way, when this bill came up in committee, I'm curious, did a single one of these donors or any donor in the state of Missouri that has ever made a low dollar donation or a recurring donation, did they show up to the hearing to say that this was a problem? Of course they didn't. Did any of the organizations, the hundreds of organizations that support veterans, that support seniors, show up to say that this was a problem? No, they did not. Not a single one of them showed up to say that this is a problem. And the reason is it's not a problem because this is a mechanism. These low dollar networks are a mechanism for people to engage in the political process that before 2008 did not exist. And so I think the really interesting thing here is I know Jim Murphy. I know Jim Murphy knows me. He's got my phone number. If this were genuinely a case of concern that a legislator had about this, you would think that he would make a phone call and have a conversation with me about that.
And he hasn't, I assume, right?
He has not, because really what this is about is this is a political, vindictive attack. And there's another interesting thought experiment that I think that if we did, now Jim Murphy's going to term out this year, and several of the folks that were probably not my biggest fans in the legislature are also going to term out. If we don't pass this bill this year, what are the odds this bill is going to come back next year? That there's going to be an effort by Republicans and Democrats to go after the ability for individuals to make low-dollar donations next year? Probably near zero. And beyond my activities...
Wait, why do you think that exactly?
Because I'm making the case that this is more about targeting an individual, me in this case, than it is about what actually makes up good policy.
So you're basically saying that regardless of the result of the St. Charles County executive's race, once that's over and people have forgotten about the fundraising issues or practices that are causing controversy around you, it just won't be as big of an issue.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And if I'm wrong about that, if I were incorrect about that, then we would be seeing folks in groups show up to give testimony in opposition to it. Right now, this is a singular political assault by a guy that probably didn't like very much how I conducted the Senate for my few years in the Senate.
But the specific example he was mentioning was like testimony from somebody who had dementia or memory problems that clicked on something that they thought was going to go toward a pro-Trump or pro-Republican national group. Can you understand after reading that why that sort of thing would cause people to have concern, divorced from whether this is targeted at you or not?
Sure. And you know what we did? Even though that individual never contacted us, we actually went out of we made the decision. I made the decision to refund every donation that we've ever gotten from that person in particular. Not because he asked for it, but because you're right. I felt like that was the right thing to do. In fact, we've done that for anyone that has come to us and said, hey, you know, I may have made a donation that's in error. I'd like to get that. We always make that. Every one of these donations are voluntary, and we want people to be supporting our efforts because they like the ideas that we're talking about. And again, when we have hundreds of thousands of people from all over the country that are responding to those messages, we absolutely want to make sure that there's some integrity to the system. In fact, the portals that we use, WinRed, has very strict guidelines that if we get too many folks that are complaining or that they feel like they have been taken advantage of, they will actually shut your account down.
Yeah.
But we have actually had a almost spotless record for the past 2 years while we've been doing this.
Yeah, and to play devil's advocate, if you had 100,000 people donate to you through this way, there's going to be instances like what was mentioned in the newspaper where people feel like they were donating to the wrong thing, but that would probably still be a pretty small. It would be like 0.001
Sure.
unless there's a large amount of people doing this. But
And keep in mind, this idea of recurring donations or recurring costs or recurring expenses is actually a pretty natural concept in our American society.
Yeah.
I mean, do we have a bill going through the legislature that's going to ask whether or not the cable company has to get a positive confirmation for you to continue charging your credit card every month?
I mean, that would
Well, of course
that
not.
would be nice, but I understand though why that would also be kind of annoying.
that would be
considered similar to like requiring union members to continually
there you go.
take out dues
But-
every month.
But we're
Like,
not having that conversation
we're not.
As a part of the bill. And taking a step back from this, the big picture that I would want folks to ask themselves is, would the world be better or not if all candidates built their support bases on low-dollar networks from many, many more donors donating $1 or $2 at a time based on a response to ideas versus our current system of politicos in Missouri going to the most powerful special interests in our state, asking for enormous checks and getting checks that are up to $1 million, and then coincidentally, oftentimes seeing legislation pass out of Jefferson City that supports those particular special interests, good or bad.
So you mentioned Doge, which was the Elon Musk run government efficiency gambit that I think fizzled out eventually. But I do recall when there were articles about your fundraising practices in 2023 and 2024, a lot of it was Trump-related or Trump issue-related. You know, the company that both you and your PAC hired, Targeted Victory, was actually chastised by Trump for using his name to raise money. So does the president or the president's campaign have a point that using his name to raise money for a gubernatorial race was just not the right thing to do?
Well, Donald Trump also he and of himself is a reflection of ideas. So you're right that it's almost, he has become such a avatar of ideas that it is difficult to separate Donald Trump's name from certain policies that we want to try to get across when we're getting our message out. Now, I will also say, and yeah, this was a new system, so there were some headaches, as I'll describe them, putting this together. But if you also recall, I later secured Donald Trump's endorsement in that gubernatorial
Along with the
race.
other two.
Along with the other two. But
yeah.
I think that was a strong indication that we're all on the same page, we're all rowing in the same direction.
So the other thing that comes to mind when we're specifically talking about the PAC, Believe in Life and Liberty, that sounds like a generic Republican-leaning PAC, not a PAC that is going to support Bill Eigel's political endeavors. Is the use of the PAC name as opposed to, say, Eigel for county executive or Eigel for governor, in and of itself deceptive, because when people see the name of the committee, they think it is some national endeavor?
I think that folks are going to be far more interested in the ideas that they're seeing. In addition, and by the way, those disclosures are required for us to put on any solicitation we make. So that name is always going to be there. But I think ultimately folks are making the decision whether or not to donate to that cause based on the message that they're seeing. So if they see a message about a candidate or an entity that's supporting government efficiency, they're going to respond to that far more than the name of the committee. And I think that's the most important thing. And that's, I would argue, that's the way it should be.
In my older age, I have become more blunt in the way I frame things. So I'm just going to kind of like rip the Band-Aid off.
Okay.
Do you think the attention over your fundraising practices are not about your county executive bid, but are about weakening you enough to where you don't win this race and cannot challenge Mike Kehoe in 2028?
Yes to everything but the last statement. I think it's not about trying to have me avoid a particular race in the future. It is absolutely about trying to weaken me versus an honest discussion about what fundraising is good, how we should manage fundraising, and what's appropriate in our current culture. It is absolutely an attack on me.
You don't think the fact that a lot of state legislators who are Republicans, who are close with Governor Kehoe, they're just doing this because they have a burning interest in who the St. Charles County executive is? I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry, Senator, but I feel like they're doing this because they think you're going to primary Kehoe again.
If this were a genuine conversation about who's using these low-dollar networks, and if these low-dollar networks are a good idea, then why haven't these same legislators come out and asked every one of our federal delegation, all of whom use these same avenues, to cease and desist what they're doing? But that conversation doesn't happen. Now, I'm here today arguing that I think these low-dollar networks are great because they allow so many more people to engage in the political process that they've never been done before. And it may lead to a political world where candidates, instead of going after these big checks that always come with expectation, they're going to go based on ideas that they support to a wider number of folks. I think that's a great thing. And I think if we could get the big corporate special interests out of our donations and fundraising, that would be good for the state. But this is where we are.
Bill Eigel is a former...
All right. And there's that. Listen, I'm just going to give a kind of a short rebuttal to that. I think the Republicans have a big issue. So the Republicans like to schmooze, and the MHRC demands that they go out and raise so much money for the Republican Party. And that if you do raise that kind of money, that's how you get your committee chairs, and if you raise the most money, then you become Speaker of the House, or Senate pro tem, or whatever, right? It's all attached to dollar signs. And I'm like, okay, it tells me that if you're dependent on lobbyist money to get enough campaign funds to run and keep your seat, and then you get this interest in getting enough money to get to the top spot, you're running not on, I have the best policies for freedom and liberty and smaller government and lower taxes and less spending. You don't have those. You have ideas that you want to get through. You'll cram them through unconstitutionally. And because you choose not to operate in a constitutional manner, you are left depending on lobbyists to keep the majority Republican in the House and Senate, because you don't have policies that really stand out from the majority of a lot of other people in other states or at the federal level. You don't have those. In fact, you borrow talking points from the national level to run at the state level. Now, some of that blame goes to the voters because they're not educated enough on the topics. So I can't blame the representatives and the senators and those actively campaigning for a seat in the halls of government. I can't blame that completely on them, because we have a highly uneducated voter base for the most part. But again, I think if you had, as they'd like to brag, big red ideas, that's what Bill Eigel campaigned on, big red ideas. I think if your ideas stood out and you were a good messenger of liberty, I think you could probably get a lot of donations. But if you're tying your campaign for governor to the same language used at the national level and using Donald Trump's name, or now that you're running for this county executive position, that you're using these terms and this language and these topics that are thrown around at the national level to gain attention, to me, you're not standing out enough from the crowd. It's just, you're not. And again, I know, listen, I'm not that person to get up in front of a room and draw the big hurrahs and get a big gathering of people because my the way I relay the message of liberty is just so profound. I'm not a Ron Paul or a Thomas Massey type, right? But if I'm going to run for office, like if I was that type of person and I decided, you know what? I'm going to throw my hat in the ring for governor of Missouri. I will do my honest to goodness best to relay the ideas of liberty. And even though it might bore the crowd a little bit, I'm going to throw out, hey, do you know our budget doubled in the amount of 4 or 5 years, and then half our money comes from the federal government, a government that abuses us with taxes and everything else. So maybe we need to switch it up a little bit. Maybe we need an actual new way of thinking instead of the road we keep going down, which is laterally moving a tax from here to here and fooling you and things and not reducing the spending, building parks over I-70 in Kansas City. Is that going to get us more freedom and liberty? No, it's not. Somehow we need someone who can relay that message better and not rely on tactics like this where you're running for governor, but you're like, I'll take donations from anywhere, even if it's like half of them from out of state. To me, that's being a little deceitful and it's not honest, and I'm not a fan. But would Bill Eigel have been a better governor than Kehoe? Probably yes. I would say yes. That's a good bet, right? But I don't like the campaign tactics. And again, if you want to get people into politics, then find a way to get the message to them. They can donate to you without sending out spam texts and all this other stuff that may be misleading if they don't read all the fine print and see the button that you got, the box you have to uncheck so it's not reoccurring. Be transparent, be honest, put your freaking name on it, not a pack, put your name on it. And if you're that good, the donations will flow to you anyway.
I will just say that I'm not disagreeing with anything that you just said at all. But I think that interview went really well for Eigel. Like, again, we're not talking about the most informed people. So when you're here, when you just listen to what he's saying, I mean, there was a lot of just garbage coming out of his mouth at certain times. Like, I loved how he was like, I'm proud of the small donations. And he's like, yeah, you took a lot of big donations too. And he was like, well, yeah, we had it all. And I'm like, oh, okay. So you're not better. You just also used a deceitful tactic to, get more money also. Okay. Man, what else did he say? Oh yeah, the recurring donations and recurring payments, that's just a part of life. And it's like, yeah, but how many people associate that part of their life with political donations? Because almost nobody. But I think he touched on all the things he needed to touch on to like come across as someone honest. Because he probably said small dollar donations 50 times. And so I think, he was really trying to like get his we're talking about $1, $2, $5 donations. You know what I mean? He was so polished, crisp, like leave moral and ethics aside for half a second, just from like a Gavin Newsom good at this kind of thing, which I mean, I used to think that, but Gavin Newsom had a huge gaffe we could touch on at one point. But my point being is before that, I used to think Gavin Newsom was like good at speaking. Like he took questions well for a Democrat, especially. And I think Eigel, like he took the questions well, especially like you're saying, if you're not really paying attention to what he's saying that hard, because like, again, he just tried to brush everything off as like, no, man, it's just like a thing. It's like, no one else was doing what you were doing. No one else was coming up with packs that were acronyms that sound like they were for national, like no one else was deceiving people or not like giving people a clear indication of where their money was going. You know what I'm saying? But one thing I will say is that all of the Missouri politicians try to tie themselves to Trump. Like they all did that, and they all tied themselves to national issues. There wasn't hardly like Bill Eigel was like, oh yeah, eliminate the income tax or whatever. But like Kehoe, all of his commercials that I remember were like, we need to stop immigration and we need to down with the Chinese farms. And like, they're going after China and after the immigrants. It's national issue stuff. And they all had they'll have pictures of the worst Democrats in the country that aren't Missourian. They'll just be bad Democrats, and they'll be their faces will be dark and, redded out. And then they'll have Trump and whoever's running for office, or if they ever had a picture together, heaven forbid, it'd be that guy and Trump with their arm around each other, oh, look at me, support me. And like he said, he got Trump's support for, he got his endorsement along with the other gubernatorial candidates, but it wasn't the only thing Trump was worried about with Eigel using his face as his donations is taking donations from Trump. But he wasn't mad about it. He was just hey, quit taking my money, buddy. That was all. It wasn't like Donald Trump was trying to crack down on his ethics of taking these recurring donations. And I think the overarching point is don't want to talk about, and like you were saying, Republicans don't want to talk about where the money comes from. Why, again, you're targeting, it is scummy behavior, and it's national donations. So it's people who obviously don't care or aren't going to be interested in St. Charles County executive race. But the point still stands is that there is something to be said about how the HRCC gets its funding, about how all the big dollar donations that go to all of these places. So yeah, I mean, that's a conversation Republicans aren't ready for. So like I said, if you hadn't read the story before and didn't know how bad it was, then this interview went well for him, because he does bring up, like you said, a good point about where Republican money comes from in the first place.
Absolutely. By the way, I don't know if anybody from around the Shell Knob area listens to the show, but Mr. Tom Martz, March the 7th at the VFW Hall in Shell Knob, Missouri, from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., will be conducting a state constitution class. That is March the 7th, the VFW Hall in Shell Knob, Missouri, from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. So good on you, Tom, for conducting another class. And I've said it a million times, but I still need to get your butt up here to Owensville so you can teach a class up here. And one of these days, I'll make good on me saying that. I want to relay. So we've talked about on this show taxing video lottery terminals. Bryant Wolfen, let me see. Nope, that's not it. That is not it. Okay. Do I have it on here? I should have it on here. Bryant Wolfen stood on the floor of the House and talked about this, and hopefully, okay, hold on. Let me pause this for a moment, share my screen. Bryant Wolfen, is this it? Nope, that's it right there. Share that screen. I'm going to play this video from our good friend Bryant Wolfen as he commented on February the 18th about these taxes and fees on video lottery terminals, if I am not mistaken. So let me start this video and we will let it play.
Here to speak on the bill.
Proceed.
All right, so Mr. Speaker, if it wasn't clear by the debate on Monday, obviously I cannot support this bill. If this bill was just simply legalizing with sensible regulation, then, I'd probably be in favor of that. But that's not what this is. As I said the other day, this creates this regulatory nightmare that I don't think conservatives and Republicans should be voting for. So obviously, since we're voting on this today, chances are they probably have the votes. Going to be close, just like last year, but I don't think we'd have brought it to the floor if we didn't. So I figured for me it might be best to just go through each of the supporting arguments that we heard the other day. We've heard a little bit of it today. I'm just going to shortly rebut those because of the short time limit that I have. So I'm going to start with those who are just wanting to expand liberty, expand freedom, expand that choice, which, obviously I fall under this camp if I were to support this bill. But I'm going to argue that this bill isn't only about letting Missourians make that choice, whether or not they want to gamble. It heavily affects the liberty of business owners. Are we just going to shoo their freedoms and liberties aside as well? This bill, it creates the system that determines, the tiered system, who can get licenses, who cannot get licenses. And this system is heavily going to favor large, well-capitalized businesses and, of course, the government itself. will heavily benefit from this. And it's not actually going to support and expand very much on the freedoms of the individual citizen, on our small business owners, which are the ones that I would remind you we're supposed to be the ones that supposed to be representing them in this very building. So I'm going to move on to this gray machine argument. That's a simple solution. This bill goes so far beyond a solution of making gray machines illegal, it's not even funny. We could very easily pass a bill that clarifies what legal machines can be without the rest of this mess. And the last time I checked, it was actually a Republican position to minimize government involvement, not expand it. So why are we starting from a position to where I think this side of the aisle would probably regulate instead of where we should be regulating, which is minimally? So next, I want to move to the consumer protection arguments. In this bill, we're passing regulations that are going to attempt to cut down on predatory business practices, which, obviously, I think makes sense in some aspects. But it also passes protections that protects the consumer from themselves. But it does this by limiting wager amounts and winning percentages, and so on. And I would ask you, don't you think that we may indirectly be feeding these addictions, these vices, which, of course, we as a government in this bill incentivize from these vices. So I think it's going to be to the contrary of that argument, where we're not going to be actually protecting them. We're going to be feeding the beast, so to say, and we're going to be benefiting from it, which is super unfortunate. Next, I want the local funding aspect. If you're supporting this because of the local funding, well, why don't you look at the revenue distribution? The state is the entity that will capture most of this revenue. Local governments are going to receive just a small percentage, but yet they're going to be the ones considered to be the front lines and be the bearer or be the bearer of most of the enforcement responsibilities. So I would ask, if this bill is so beneficial to your local governments, how many of these political subdivisions have rose in support of this? Because I'm yet to see any. The last, most egregious argument that I feel like is to be made is the funding for important programs. We are selling support for the funding of these important programs for education and veterans, disabled persons. And if we think about that for a minute, we're proposing to fund essential government functions by relying on Missourians to lose their money. The more they lose, the more the state gains. And I would ask, where does this logic stop? If we continue to follow this principle, I think this body, on this principle, should be perfectly fine with legalizing other vices, such as prostitution or maybe the consumption of harmful drugs. We'll just slap a big old tax on top of it, and it benefits the vulnerable, so I'm sure it'll be fine. I know I've said I'm running out of time here. Look, I highly oppose this bill. I have more rebuttals that I could go down. I welcome open discussion to this. I just think this is such a bad bill to do so, and it's really frustrating as someone who does promote liberty, that came to this building to promote the freedom of choice, for us to kind of go down this route. Mr. Speaker, I can't support this bill. Thank you.
Gentleman from...
And hard to say it better than Mr. Wolfen there did there. Kudos to him. I want to play one other short video talking about going down the road of freedom and so on and so forth, and Republicans, small government, blah blah blah. We've all heard the same stupid song and dance over the past several decades. Republicans we want small government, less spending and tax cuts and all this. Now this came from the Missouri House Democrats, all right? So they don't have a leg to stand on when they say this, really, but they do make a solid point. Listen to what this schmuck says. This is Representative Phil Amato. Just, jeez. All right, let me see. What am I doing here, guys? Here we go. Let me play it now. Jeez. Please.
I'm going to vote for this and support it. I would encourage everybody in the body to do the same thing, because in my mind, it's not our job to see if it's constitutional or not. That's not why we're elected. It's not our job to see if it's constitutional or not.
It's not our job
to see if it's constitutional or not. That's not why we're elected.
I think that should be a commercial for a liberty lover or something and go brought to you by the normal Republicans in the state of Missouri. And just, okay, folks, this is what we talk about. Now, Tom, Bryant Wolfen sent me the video. Tom, if you didn't listen to Tom's hour with Nick Reed on, oh my God, at ksgf.com, go look at that. He and Nick Reed also discussed this clip, but this leads to some people might say, well, it was Phil Amato. No. Go to legiscore.us, look up the the percentage that they vote constitutionally, and you will find that there is a very large majority to think they're not there to see if a bill's constitutional or not. That's not why they were elected. I'm telling you, that's the opinion of more of them than you would like to imagine. And that's all I'm going to say on that. Brandon.
Oh, just the bitter irony of it coming from the Missouri House Democrats, though. Like, man, like, you're right, but come on. You're not constitutional either. Come on. Why are you playing? No, but, always good to see our friend of the show, Bryant Wolfen, get on the House floor and, just make some sense down there. Like he said, he's like, we're the side that's supposed to be fighting for small business, and we're the side that's supposed to be for less government interference and regulation. So why is a bill coming from our side starting like this? He's like, that's crazy. And like he said, it's wild to try to like use these vice taxes to fund things that you think are important, because that means that it's better for us if they gamble. It's better. And you're like, well, they're going to do it anyway. But no. This level is it's a level of encouragement at a certain point to do it. And so, yeah, I think he's like, so what are we going to do next? Prostitution and all drugs, because for the taxes, like he just made a bunch of really good points, and it's good to see someone on the House floor doing that. Because, sometimes they're like, we don't need to know if it's constitutional. That's not what we're elected for.
I feel like, listen, I know I'm not the best at impersonations, but I just feel like there's a bunch of I don't know, it's probably an insult to Sling Blade, right? I just feel like they walk around into each other's offices like, what do you got in there? It's good to eat. You got any them French fried potatoes in there? You got some biscuits with mustard in there? What you got in there? It's good to eat. Or, the bill won't go, and they're like, ain't got no gas in it. They're just like, Jesus, get out of here, dude. And it's just Sling Blades walking everywhere, just saying weird crap. And again, folks, I'm hardly ever the smartest guy in the room, but these people make me feel like Einstein. I feel like I should not be in health and safety anymore. I should be building rockets or coming up with new technology, but not going around like that's not safe. They make me feel way more intelligent than the work that I'm doing now, or even sitting behind this microphone and doing this show. I feel like I should be doing things that will improve our lives and make them easier. When you hear the multiple Sling Blades in the House and Senate, but that's just me. I don't know.
Great Sling Blade impression, by the way. Yeah, good Billy Bob Thornton in there. But no,
I just say I do that to a nurse. We have a nurse whose family is apparently Mennonite. She is not Mennonite anymore. I will constantly walk into the nurse's office when I get in the building at 7:00, and I'll just walk back there, and she's like, "What's up?" I just go, "All right, Tom, that was not very nice." But anyway, I just walk in there, and I'm like, "What you got in there? It's good to eat." And then we make a joke because we joke about her having a sawmill and riding a horse and buggy to work. And sometimes she'll bring in something she baked. And I'm like, oh, did you make some more of those sawdust muffins for us? She's like, I don't have a sawmill. So anyway, also, Tom, that was not very nice. Tom said Einstein or Epstein. You heard me say it, Einstein. Anyway, Go ahead, Brent.
No, you pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I want to get to this because I titled this episode, Does It Matter If Our Opinions Don't Matter? This goes, now I have not watched the full interview or the debate discussion between Mike Huckabee and Tucker Carlson, but there is one thing that stands out in this to me. I've heard others play this clip. When we're talking about our foreign policy and our love for going in and blowing up brown people or whatever, because they make us angry, because they're not whatever, right? Because Israel doesn't like them, apparently. And people think that people still have this thing. They're going to talk about the word, a somewhat type of democracy that we have. Well, you don't like it, you just vote them out. It doesn't matter if there's AIPAC with everyone besides like Thomas Massey having an AIPAC person. You think changing out the president is going to like change the fact that we're not going to do Israel's bidding? Are you out of your mind? But let me pull up this video. Oh, God bless America. Let me share the screen first. Stupid. All right. Now I can expand it. This is only a minute and 18 seconds, but this should tell us all what these officials, the decision makers, or as Tom Woods likes to call them, the central planners, this should tell you everything about how they feel about you and your opinion.
How much does it matter what Americans think?
Well, it matters every bit what Americans think.
Okay, so what percentage of Americans support a war with Iran?
I don't know. Do you know?
I do. I think it's around 21%.
Okay.
Is that enough to have a war with Iran?
We don't live in a world where you have a poll taken to find out whether our policy should be a particular direction. Because
I thought you just said that
that's
we
direct
vote.
democracy. No, we care deeply about it. But on the other hand, do we make the decisions of foreign policy and even domestic policy based on
we
what
care
the
deeply
latest
about
poll
it in
number
what
is?
sense? If we're ignoring it, then in what sense do we, quote, care deeply about it?
Well, I think we care deeply when we see there's a threat.
No, but about Americans' opinions. So you've got 350 million Americans.
Yeah.
They voted in this last election on the basis, in part, of the promise no more wars. Okay. So now we're about to have a war, looks like. 80% of people are against it. In that range, let's say 70%, but nowhere near majority support for this war. You just said it matters deeply what Americans think. And if the overwhelming majority are against it, in what sense does it matter? Because what I hear is it matters what they think, but it really doesn't matter what they think because...
No, you take it in, you certainly ingest that.
And then what do you do with it once you ingest it?
Then you make sure that you have... No,
you just gotta... It goes out the other end, obviously.
So there's that. And I think that's the full, everything you need to know in a nutshell. Also, Agarizer, good to see you in the live chat. I think that tells you everything, folks. This should remove all doubt. Does my government care about my opinion? I don't know. If you had a magic 8-ball and you shook it and you said, magic 8-ball, does the government care about my opinion? It is going to say no over and over again. You can just like change all the sides to say no. They don't care. Our Congress and the office of the President of the United States has clearly been bought and paid for. If you have very few willing to stand up and go, I don't want to fund Israel anymore. If they want to go to war, let them do it on their own. We wish them well. That's it. I'm not, as someone in Congress, you should not go, hey, you know what? I think it'd be a good idea for us to print more money, send it to another country, and further indebt our own people. And they just go, yes, I like that idea. Let's do it, say, 4 times a year. I don't know. Seems like it really, and they just keep doing it, and it does. 80% of people. Now, I know that's not the whole America, but I can just about bet you that 75% of Americans probably go, "Hey, probably shouldn't do this," and they're like, pfft. but we got the 25% that agree with us, right? So let's carry that with us and use that to further our agenda. And it just makes my head want to burst. But Mike Huckabee just said the quiet part out loud. So anytime you hear a political ad in the coming midterms, let's see how many people say, I am not going to support Israel. I don't want to send money to Israel. I don't want to support their war in Gaza. I don't want to support the war with Iran. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. No, it's going to be Trump, cost of living still high, and pedophiles and all this. The Israel thing will be a very quiet murmur across the country by a few candidates who dare to speak out. And to me, the only one of those that has the pretty solid bet that he's going to win re-election is Thomas Massey, because he's highly principled, and you just can't bust his chops on things. You can't go, well, here you, and he's like, here, what did I do? Oh, I voted with the Constitution, and I voted not to spend more money, and voted not to protect pedophiles, and voted not to, go to another unjust war. Oh, you guys got me now. Oh my goodness, I'm scared. So, yeah, I'm so done with it. But Huckabee said it out loud. He said the quiet part out loud. There should be no further doubt in your mind if they care about your opinion or not on this topic matter. They will continue to fund foreign countries. They will continue to fund proxy wars. They will continue to do Israel's bidding. Unless you take, 99% of them and say you're fired. That's the only choice you got, folks, really.
No, like you said, it should be clear to most people already that politicians don't care about your opinions, especially when it comes to going to war. They will go to war in the most unpopular of circumstances whenever, and then they'll play it off as a threat. One thing I will say, and I'm not saying that it's misleading, because the fact is true that only, a very small number of people support the war. The reason this administration could get away with it is that the majority of Republicans are unsure. And so they launch the strike. They tell you it's a success. They could still keep majority Republican support, which is all Donald Trump cares about, because he's not going up for re-election, does not care. And his handlers certainly don't care about his, whatever the base is going to, or not, what the rest of the country is going to think of him outside of the base. But the craziest part of that Tucker Huckabee interview that I saw was where Huckabee was explaining that Israel has a right to like a bunch of land that is within the borders of a bunch of other countries, like a bunch of Muslim countries. And a lot of them came out and like joined on to this big letter condemning what Mike Huckabee had said, because he basically said that there's a biblical right. And if you've seen me or heard us talk about Mike Huckabee and his incessant biblical arguments for, supporting Israel and all of this, he means what he's saying, or at least, he's playing the role well of pretending to mean what he says when he's like, no, I actually think that Israel has a right. And I, wouldn't be a bad thing if they just invaded all these other places and took over all this other land. It's like, what are you saying? Do you not understand how that plays right now? We're lining up for a war with Iran, saying that Israel has a right to all of the land in all these countries. It's insane. It's insane talk. Like, are you trying to start a Muslim coalition against the United States in the Middle East? Because it seems like you are. Right now, paying them all off to not attack Israel is working. So maybe stick to not making an Israel promise that no one asked for.
Yeah, it's he, and because Tucker brought up, he's like, it goes from the Euphrates to here. And he's like, well, yeah. And then he kind of backtracked a little later. He kind of backpedaled, well, like maybe not all of it, It's like, oh, well, I believe what you said the first time. You meant all of it, which is, Israel, Iraq, part of Egypt, Syria, all these
Jordan,
Jordan. Yep. All these, you think they have a right to all that. And it's like, I, you know, Dave Smith made a good point when he talked about, if you like, how far do you have to go back for like bloodline, like real Jews? Because I guess with Mike Huckabee, like if you're Jewish, then you go over to Israel. Like that's your stuff now. That's your land too, because you just converted to Judaism. And Tucker's like, maybe we need to do, because his Abraham's descendants, that's their land. It's like, okay, we'll do a DNA test and see how far you back can go. Are you a direct descendant of Abraham? What are we doing here? So Dave Smith's like, okay, I bought a house, I own it, I have the deed, and then somebody comes in and goes, well, this was promised to me, so it's my house now. Dave's like, the hell it is, because I bought it, I paid for it, I have the deed, it's not yours. There are people in Palestine that might have had a deed to their house, but Israel's like, yeah, it's not your house anymore. We leveled it, so you can't tell your house was there. You know it was there because you know the landmarks, kind of. You know which crater's yours, but it's ours now because, again, I believe it was Mike Huckabee had 1,000 pastors that were invited to some Israel summit and how to train them to come back to the U.S. and get their followers to say, hey, you got to support Israel all the way. And I'm sorry, but if you have to take and invite 1,000 people to leave the country, to go to another country, to teach them how to come home and tell people and get your parishioners or whatever to support whatever Israel's doing, you're not leading by example. You're doing bad things and trying to get people to indoctrinate their followers to follow your agenda. If you're doing good works and these people are going into a church to learn about good works, they should just see it. You know what they saw? They saw cities and settlements leveled. They saw little kids buried under rubble. Now, most of those people, I would hope, would go, it doesn't seem like something Jesus would say. Yeah, go ahead. Just blow up the kids because they're brown. And I don't like brown people either. Just doesn't seem like something Jesus would say or do. It just seems a little unbiblical, unchristian-like. So again, if you have to bring people to your country, figure out a way, I don't know, wine and dine them, talk them up, blow a bunch of smoke up their butthole and say, go back home and tell your people to call our people, then you're probably not doing good things, man. You're probably maybe committing a genocide, blackmailing people, buying their votes in Congress. I mean, I don't know. And just overall just taking over things and running foreign policy. So, yeah, Israel's going to have to do a much better job. I shouldn't say Israel. The government of Israel, the Bibi Netanyahus of the world are going to have to do an about face on their whole foreign policy to get me to go, not such a bad guy. I'm feeling like maybe he's turned a new leaf and he's looking back on things going, I might have been a little homicidal back then. So I'm not going to keep dropping bombs every day. I'm going to back off to once a week. And then I'm like, okay, well, we're getting there. Can you get to the part where you don't drop any? Like, are we going to keep moving forward with this? No? Okay, well, then you're still a piece of crap. I don't know. It bothers me to see pastors flown to another country to be taught how to indoctrinate the people that go to their church. That bothers me to no end.
Oh, so just so anyone's like curious, we are like almost certainly going to war with Iran. It's just a matter of when. This is from a lot of these are from anti-war, but it's U.S. withdrawing from base in northeast Syria, transferring equipment to Iraqi Kurdistan. The Joint Chiefs chairman warns Trump of significant risks if the U.S. attacks Iran. U.S. evacuates non-emergency personnel from embassy in Beirut as it prepares for a potential attack on Iran. So we're making all of the moves. So if you're wondering if we're going to negotiate, we're starting from a position of negotiation that is just out of this world insane. You've got Trump declaring outright that we've destroyed any chance for them to have any sort of nuclear enrichment capabilities. And they also don't have a weapons program capable of launching a nuclear warhead anywhere close to anything that would be considered like if they even tried, because it's such a heavy bomb that you would have to load in to build this, it would be shot down in half a second. Like there's no danger from their nuclear program, and no one can even find evidence that they're even trying. They've actually are willing to to sell off their enriched uranium. They're willing to do that as part of the negotiations, but they're like they won't refuse to have a missile basically a missile defense system in case Israel decides to launch an attack. And that's what the negotiations are. But it's just a classic negotiation tactic where you've inserted a red pill to give yourself a reason to go to war, or whatever they call it, where you insert a poison pill, not a red pill. When you insert a poison pill into a negotiation to go to war. I mean, and another thing that I wanted to bring up too is you were talking about how Dave Smith brought up the argument of like someone coming to your house and being like, God promised me this land. It's happening. Like, even if you are like, oh, Hamas is evil, and if you happen to have like the insane belief that every child in Gaza is Hamas and they deserve to be wiped out, very unchristian in my opinion. But if that's your view, what about the West Bank, where the Israeli government is basically, they're not always doing it, but they are defending the mobs that go and just slaughter people's their livestock. They burn down their houses, and then they eventually, when those people have to move, they steal their land. What is that? These are farmers, goat farmers, people with kids, and you'll see videos of American journalists filming it, and you just don't see it. The mainstream media has no interest in posting any of it. But if you just do a quick Google search, are Israelis still building settlements on Palestinian land in the West Bank? The answer is unequivocally yes. And you would be burying your head in the sand to think otherwise. And there is no justification for that. That is just you taking someone else's land. They had a farm, you slaughtered their livestock and burned their house in front of their children. Congratulations. You're the most moral army in the world for standing by and letting that happen.
Yeah, it is. I don't know, dude. The whole thing is disgusting. I mean, but we're still funding Ukraine versus Russia. Some people think, I saw a post the other day, somebody thinks, oh man, just about got Russia where we want them. Like what? I don't know what crack house you're stumbling out of, but you need to don't smoke crack and then post on social media, because it's a bad look. Like, you might as well, every picture of you should just have a glass pipe in your hand. Like, oh, well, he's on the pipe again. That's why he's posting this silly stuff. But yeah, the Huckabees of the world, the Mark Levins of the world, the Ben Shapiros of the world, Laura Loomer. I still say that Laura Loomer and Mark Levin are somehow related, but I can't say the technical term, but I can say it radio friendly. They're basically butthole babies. They didn't come out of the womb. They came out of the colon, because they're just turds, man. They're just turds with horrible talking points and sucking up to the Trump regime and sucking up to Israel and sucking up to anybody else and anybody who badmouth. Again, Thomas Massey's just, and Tucker Carlson, he's a traitor. Mark Levin had a post about him being, God dang it, what was the word he used? He's such an idiot. Who's the traitor that everybody thinks about from
Benedict Arnold?
Yes. He's going to be the new Benedict Arnold. That, according to Mark Levin, Tucker Carlson is going to be the next Benedict Arnold. He is going to be known throughout history to be worse than Benedict Arnold. But I'm just like, and that's the thing, folks. That's all they have left. They don't have they don't have a good argument. So they're going to revert to normal campaigning for whatever horrible idea they have, and that's just the name call. Name call or backpat. But they don't come out with like all this information. They just say if you're against Israel, you're an anti-Semite, or you're paid by Qatar or something. That's all they have. I'm like, dude, if you have some viable information telling me that the Iranians are a direct threat to us, put it out there. I'm more than willing to listen to your side, but they don't. Now, one other thing that came up that Mike Huckabee brought up was the amount of Iranians in America. And that's a threat, right? That's an Iranian threat in the U.S. And I'm like, I don't know. I just think that if you attack Iran, you might get those people angry. And then you might have blowback, but you might also not have blowback. They might be happy to be here and not over there. I don't know. Just because they're Iranian and they're over here doesn't mean you're going to have another Boston Marathon bombing, pressure cooker bombs or something. No, you have no proof of that. What we do have proof of, 9/11's fantastic, thing there. Fantastic example of blowback from horrible foreign policy decisions made throughout the decades. And in putting our nose where it doesn't belong. And then, again, having the audacity. I can't believe these people did this. Really? You can't? Did you ever go over there and look at where they lived and what we did or what we helped to do by proxy? No, you never have. Of course. Of course you haven't. We're going to go back to brown people are bad. You can't trust them. Don't let them near airplanes or tall buildings or pressure cookers. But also, we're going to go blow up we're going to go invade another country on behest of a different country and then expect that everyone just takes it in stride, has a kumbaya moment. We all hold hands and hold candles and sing America the Beautiful. And then everybody just goes about their day and goes, cool. And we just cheerlead it on. No, people are going to get upset. I get upset when I think about unending wars, never-ending wars, trillions of dollars wasted, thousands, if not millions of lives destroyed needlessly because of some natural resource or some other foreign nation has put so much money into the economy or the pockets and the wallets of politicians that human life just doesn't hold any meaning. It's meaningless. The value of human life is gone. We treat people like pawns in chess and we just send them off to die, or we may not do it directly. We'll just give the bombs and the bullets to other people to ruin lives because those lives aren't valuable over there. Those are people in Middle Eastern countries. Their like our lives are up here and their lives are down here. Unless you have another 9/11. And then those lives are important for a little while because that gets you to the march to war, right? Then you can build a mass surveillance state, treat every American like an enemy. That's pretty cool too, right? Listen, folks, I was thinking about this the other day. We're getting to a point where you have two groups of people in this country. You have a group of people who are willing to fill the graves and people who are left to dig the graves. That's the two classes you're going to have. You have warmongers who don't care about, they don't care about they have no value of human life. They don't care about the tragedies. They don't care about the destabilization of regions, any of that. And then you have the people over here, and you have the sons and daughters and aunts and uncles and moms and dads and nieces and nephews who get sent over there to die, and we get to bury them. That's our job. We are supposed to cheerlead the war and then bury the dead. Ignore everything else. That's what this is turning into. Those who will fill the graves and those who have to dig them. And I don't want to be a grave digger. And I don't want to send someone else. I don't want to send people to another nation to die needlessly. But if we keep listening to foreign leaders and having them dictate our foreign policy in another country, right? They're filling up graves. And we have people dictating that there's a need to fill a hole with bodies because they did something we don't like. And that's just a government that I want no part of. I don't want those people talking to me. I don't want them getting in my personal space. I don't want their cooties, if you might say. But that's what this is turning into with administrations like this and the way they've proven themselves to not care about anything they said when they campaigned. Body bag fillers and grave diggers. That's what we have. All right, Brandon, we got like 10 minutes left. What do you got?
Well, we are on the 4-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine, the bloodiest war in Europe since World War II. And I just want to reiterate to everybody what the crux of the negotiations are coming down to. Zelensky and NATO and the other members of NATO that are not the United States want to basically arm they, like, as soon as the war ends, they're going to send in British and French troops to basically line the border with Russia and its new territory that they're looking to get. So that's like the biggest hiccup. And for anybody thinking like, oh, well, that's a good idea, we need to keep an eye on big bad Putin. If just put the shoe on the other foot for a second and imagine if Russia was funding Mexico. They took part of Texas and then we were supposed to come to a negotiation where we allow Russia to put weapons on our border. You know what I'm saying? That's insane. So, yeah, of course the Russians aren't going to agree to that. It's what started the war in the first place. From Scott Horton's book, Provoked, Russia, like a couple months before the war, told NATO that if you will put in writing that Ukraine will never have NATO membership, we will not invade. And Mark Rutte, the chairman of NATO, laughed at the idea. And now here we are 4 years later, and that's what the end of this war is coming down to. And if you, like you were saying, if you think that the Ukrainians, not that you were saying this, but how you were mentioning people say that the Ukrainians are close to winning this war, just look up what the infrastructure is like in Ukraine right now. Look up how many people don't have power, how many people can't get clean water. And you tell me if that looks like the side that's getting ready to have the breakthrough for the win. Because again, Russia's not even fighting this war on their own territory. And so you're talking about a country full of people who don't have access to clean water. And every day that this war prolongs, their infrastructure just gets worse. So if this war rages on another year, there could be people freezing to death. There could be people starving to death. It's not like out of the realm of possibility. It's not happening at the moment, but it's getting super desperate and close. And so this is all for like, this is, I mean, again, I can't even, you got Zelensky's doing this as like a power play because he can't give in or he's going to be ousted, and that's just out of his realm of possibility. So what is he willing to do? Send thousands of more of his own people to be slaughtered in a war that he knows he can't win.
Yeah, dude, I remember when this started up and someone coming up to me at work, because they know I kind of follow this stuff. Not an expert on the material at hand, right? I just kind of follow it. And he's like, man, what the heck's going on with Putin? And I go, dude, stop right there. I said, I'm not agreeing with what Putin did. Please don't come into this acting like he wasn't provoked. Don't come at this like one day he just decided, those Ukrainians, and I'm going to wipe that smug look off their face. I'm really tired of them. Like, they look just a lot like us, but they're more smug. And I really don't like smug faces. So I'm going to go over there and just have a war of attrition with them because I don't like the look on their face. No, there were many, many things for decades working up to this point. And I said, I said, the news is going to tell you one thing. They're leaving 20 different things out. Our incursion, our putting missile defense systems all along their border, surrounding them by getting every country into NATO. Ukraine was the last one. There were warnings from previous administrations, State Department officials, do not do this. This is the red line for Putin. And they went, that guy ain't going to do nothing. Yeah. And they did it anyway. And here he comes. And then the Biden administration and everything else gets to act shocked and surprised to go. And then the greatest thing of all, right? The best line they came up with, this was an unprovoked attack. Which is, I know why Scott Horton titled his book, Provoked, because the media's narrative and the Biden administration's narrative was, this was an unprovoked attack on a sovereign nation. Or if you're Kamala Harris, was like, Russia is a big country and Ukraine is a small country, and this big country invaded the small country. Like we're all in kindergarten. Remember that? That was fantastic. Talk about feeling your IQ points circle the drain. But yeah, this was the narrative. This is unprovoked. And people just aren't taught. I mean, the Scott Horton types and those people, they're talking about it. You don't hear anything in the media anymore. It's all distraction points. So unfortunately, a lot of people have even just forgot about the Ukraine-Russia conflict. I mean, they're looking at Israel, but now the focus is Iran. Are we going to war with Iran? Are we going to drop bombs on them? Are we going to do this, that, and the other? And again, even if it's a poll of 1,000 people and 79% go, I don't like this, I'd say you could extrapolate that out. I'd say you're still going to get a majority of people who don't want to go to war. They don't want to see another war. They don't want to see another Middle Eastern conflict that gets drug out. Okay? They don't want to see that. I'm sure some of those people are voicing their opinions. But if you have an AIPAC person working with you, they'll stuff enough $100 bills in your ears that you won't be able to hear those people saying, hey, don't do this. This is really bad. Stuff $150 million into Trump's ears. You ain't going to hear you talking. Miriam Adelson gave me 150. You're going to have to give me 200 million to change my mind. You're going to have to pull that 150 million out, shove 200 million in, and I won't hear Adelson talk. But until then, looks like we're going to war, boys. So it's horrible. Brandon, we got like 4 minutes left. Any closing thoughts?
No, pretty much said it all there. Except that, I mean, if there's, it leaves you wondering, like, what could we possibly do at this point? And I'm not trying to discredit people's efforts, but you'll see people like Scott Horton and Dave DeCamp, who I love those guys, but they'll post like, call your senator or like call your representative to tell them you don't want to go to war. And I don't think it matters. Like you said, what does the opinions matter of the people? The theme of the show here. It doesn't matter how many times you call Ann Wagner, or if you call, who's the one in St. Louis, the Wesley Bell. It doesn't matter how many times you call those guys. They're going to go to war with Israel, or go to war with Iran on Israel's behalf. So, I mean, it's just like a brutal outcome watching this train go by and knowing there's nothing that the large masses of people could do to stop it besides organize a massive protest in a couple days. I think Friday where I'm at, it's going to be real warm. So if anybody wants to join me in protesting a war with Iran, we might have a few days left to do it. But I mean, that's about all.
Yeah. I get their sentiment. I get why they say it, because the one thing is, it's just like the state of Missouri. If you don't voice your opinion, if you don't overload their phone banks with calls, right, they get to play stupid. So if you do call and you vent and say, this is really dumb, and I'll make sure you lose, if you get a couple thousand people say, we'll make sure you are not reelected if you support stupid stuff like this, maybe you get a reaction. So it's one of those things. Are they going to listen to you and make a good decision? A good chance not. But it's one of those things that if you don't, then they get to go, I haven't had no phone calls telling me this is a bad idea. Now they could lie about that too. But if you can get 1,000 people to go, bro, that's BS, because I called your office earlier and I got your staffer saying that my call was important to them, important to you, and my opinion would be passed on to you. So again, they lie so much you can't make heads or tails of hardly anything anymore. But with that being said, thank you very much for joining us for this edition of the Missouri Liberty Report. Again, to all of those who listen on podcasting apps or at molibertyradio.us, we appreciate you. And if you're listening or if you're watching this on YouTube or Rumble or Facebook, especially if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, make sure you hit the like, make sure you hit subscribe, hit that notification bell so you'll know when we go live on Tuesday evenings at 6:30 p.m. Central. So with that being said, good evening to you all. Let us hope that people will open their eyes and their ears to what's really going on and demand better from their government. Or if that's not going to happen, we disavow ourselves of these people and go, you know what? You're all schmucks and we're done. And you can go outside and play in traffic for all we care because we're done with you. But anyway, we'll see you all next week on Tuesday evening right here at 6:30 p.m. Central Time for another edition of the Missouri Liberty Report.